Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I hope this will be the last year that will be Zoom only, and on Sunday I'll be able to go back live. I'm not actually sure how long this year will be because I realised actually that the remaining line of the sugya is actually not that. There's only a small amount of the sugya left from that which we didn't cover. But I was asked by a couple of people if I could just go over what I said last week. Because I think a few people haven't yet seen some of the Mara Makomas. So just very briefly, the Gemara says that someone who's menapeach kli zechuchis is chayiv mishum Makkeh BePatish. Now, blowing a glass vessel would ostensibly fall into the category of asiyas kli, of making a utensil. And we already saw in the sugya on Ayin Daled Amud Beis, a machlokas Rashi and Tosfos, which has seemingly significant ramifications about whether yesh binyan b'kelim or ein binyan b'kelim. And Tosfos adopted the position. Rashi said ein binyan b'kelim. Tosfos adopted the position that yesh binyan b'kelim. And Tosfos therefore asks, why is menapeach kli zechuchis not chayiv mishum boina? That's Tosfos's a question. Why isn't it chayav mishum boina? Because you've created the new utensil by blowing the glass utensil. So Tosfos actually leaves the question unanswered. So Tosfos leaves this right, leaves it unanswered. I guess technically you could answer that enochanomi, you're chayav shtayim, you're chayav mishum boina and you're chayav mishum Makkeh BePatish. And all our Gemara is saying is that you're also chayiv mishum Makkeh BePatish. That could answer the question. Tosfos is not happy with that answer, presumably because the svara that we've mentioned several times before, that it doesn't seem that there is a svara to say that by definition, if something is Makkeh BePatish, it means it's not any other machlokas, it's not any other melacha. We saw in the earlier Tosfos of Masechet. Tosfos asks, why aren't you chayiv mishum Mechatech and Memachek? So Tosfos is reading our Gemara, that when our Gemara says that Masechet Shabbat is chayiv mishum Makkeh BePatish, it means only Makkeh BePatish. And therefore he asked a question there, why isn't Memachek and Mechatech? Why aren't you also chayiv for Memachek and Mechatech? Now we saw the Shiur and the Meiri, who answered, yeah, you're chayiv 2 or 3. It's possible that you're chayiv more, and the Ran said, the enochanami, they both brought a deal that enochanami, you're chayiv mishum tlas, you're chayiv because of 2 or 3 melachos. So Tosfos isn't willing to accept that answer, either because he doesn't think it's a good reading in the Gemara, or because he doesn't believe that you can be chayiv Makkeh BePatish plus another melacha. We already saw a discussion. The Meiri really asked this question, and we looked at this earlier. Why on every time I bake a cake or bake a bread or boil some food or bake a pot in the kiln, why aren't I also chayiv for Makkeh BePatish? Why every time that I weave a garment aren't I chayiv for Makkeh BePatish? And one good answer to that question is that Makkeh BePatish is by definition completing something when it's no other melacha. If it's another melacha, then that's the melacha I've done. Then it's not Makkeh BePatish. So either way, we saw Tosfos on our Amud, in Ayin Hey Amud Beis, that Tosfos is not willing to learn that Masechet Shabbat chayiv mishum Makkeh BePatish means also chayiv mishum Makkeh BePatish. And therefore, symmetrically to that, when it comes to menapeach kli zechuchis, Tosfos, and the Gemara says you're chayiv mishum Makkeh BePatish, Tosfos is not willing to learn that means you're also chayiv for Makkeh BePatish, but he says you're only chayiv for Makkeh BePatish. Therefore, Tosfos asks, I don't understand, if yesh binyan b'kelim, why are you not chayiv for building this glass utensil? So asks Tosfos, and he leaves it unanswered. That's Tosfos' question. So one could answer that you're chayiv shtayim, and all the Gemara means you're also chayiv for Makkeh BePatish, but Tosfos is not willing to go down that route. Tosfos thinks you're only chayiv for Makkeh BePatish. That means to say you're not chayiv for bona, and Tosfos leaves it unanswered. So that was our the question that we were looking at last time. Very briefly, if you had a chance to look at the Rambams that we had a look at. The Rambam brings several examples of toldos of Makkeh of boina, and it seems this is how Rabbi Zalman Meltzer learns the sugya. He seems to say that the classic of boina is where you gather stone by stone together, in order to make an ohel or the like. So that's one type. That's the av. Out of that sprouts two toldas. Again, boina, it means building a building. So what do you do when you build a building? You both create a structure and you piece things together. So the av melachot is piecing things together to create a roof, a building roof. If you only piece things together, then that's one tolda. If you only create an ohel, then that's another tolda. So, for example, the Rambam tells us that if you make cheese, you're chayav for the tolda of boina. Why? So the Rambam says because you're makabit chelek al chelek v'dovat kakol achiyasu kafechot. Sticking piece to piece to make a whole structure is the tolda of boina. So why there is it only the tolda of boina? Because it's true you're sticking piece to piece, but you're not creating a structure. On the other hand, the Rambam says if you smooth the ground in a house, like we saw earlier, then that we saw this on Iron Gimel on the base. If you smooth a mound in the house, then since you're creating more of a space, you're chayav for boina also. Why are you chayav for boina there when you're not gathering pieces together? The answer is because you're creating a building. So if you have either result, either similarity to boina, either in the process you're piecing things together, or you're enhancing or creating a structure. In both those cases, you'll be chayav for the tolda of boina. And therefore, the Even HaEzel simply says that that with glass blowing you have neither category. It's neither piecing things together because that's not how glass blowing works. Glass blowing, you have the globule of the glass and you blow it and expand it. You're not piecing things together, and you're not creating a building, and therefore it doesn't fit under either category of tolda, and therefore you're not chayiv of boina, and therefore you're not chayiv for boina. You're only chayiv for Makkeh BePatish. That's how he resolves this the contradictions in the Rambam. If you piece things together, you're chayiv as a tolda. Even if it's a keli, a utensil, if you create a proper structure, you're chayiv as a tolda, even though you're not piecing things together. The av is piecing things together and creating a structure. However, if it's a utensil with no piecing together, then it doesn't fulfill either construction element of construction. It's not construction because you're not piecing things together. It's not construction because it's not a building, and therefore you are potter. This is one answer to the question, at least in the view of the Rambam. The second answer to the question that we saw was in Moshe Feinstein, Negros Moshe, which I also printed in the sources. And Negros Moshe says that he says if you create a utensil, something from nothing, yesh me'ayin, it's a whole utensil created, that's where we would say that it's binyan, because you've created something together. An extension of a utensil, when you're enlarging it, would not be a binyan b'kedim, so says Moshe Feinstein. And he understands our Gemara, like indeed I think the Meiri seems to understand also, that although the Chittan seems to understand that this is the enlarging of a utensil. Why is it the enlarging of a utensil? Because the Gemara says it's Makkeh BePatish, it's finishing off the glass blown. Now, when you blow a glass, you blow several times till eventually you arrive at the utensil completed, which means to say that if this is Makkeh BePatish, this is the final blow. The earlier blows made it into a keli, perhaps, but the final blow, it's already a keli, you're simply expanding it. Expanding a keli is not boina. Creating a new space, a new cavity in a keli, that's the melachot of boina. Merely expanding a keli is not the melachot of boina, and therefore this would be a second answer to the question that even though yesh binyan mekalim, that's only when you are creating a keli, not where you are merely expanding a keli. In other words, this is a weakness in kelim. A structure which I expand is the melachot of boina because I'm expanding the structure. A keli which I expand, because a keli is a less significant entity, if I create it, it's the melacha. If I merely expand it, it's not the melacha. Now, the final point I made is that Rashi doesn't understand like that. If you look at Rashi on the Gemara, Rashi says that this blowing of this menafeach, the blowing into the klizuchis, is k'shehutzach when it's melted. Naser nefuach, the keli is made through blowing. So Rashi seems to imply that this is making the keli something from nothing. It's the blow which creates the air bubble inside the glass, and through that creates the glass utensil. So Rashi says it is something from nothing, but that's because Rashi holds ein binyan b'kelim. So Rashi can learn the Gemara that it's something from nothing, and he's not bothered why it's only Makkeh BePatish, not boina, because Rashi says ein binyan b'kelim. the Rishonim that say Yesh Binyan B'Kedim, if they learn the Gemara means there's no bona and only Makkeh BePatish, if they go with Tosfos and then Medayik that in the Gemara that there's no Makkeh BePatish, no bona, the answer would be because they're understanding that in Glassblowing this is the second blow or the final blow. That's why it's Makkeh BePatish, not the initial blow that makes it creates the first vacuum, the first cavity inside this glass bubble. So that seems to be how Moshe Feinstein would learn the sugya. And again, important maramokim in understanding Makkeh BePatish and Boina. So I'll pause there. That was more or less a summary of that section of what I spoke about in Shiur. I also spoke about Hatzad Surah, about designs on a kelim. I'm not going to go through that again. The recording is available in the last Shiur online for those who wanted to cover that. But I think this covers the main points that I sort of looked at last week, and perhaps we haven't yet seen the Mara Makomas. Given that this is a Zoom format, I'll just pause in case any questions, and then otherwise we'll carry on. Okay, so that's a summary of the previous sugya. I just want to really finish off the sugya now by looking at the final line of the Gemara, and I think I gave you the right at the end of the source sheets. I printed some Mara Makomas on this. So the Gemara says that the Gemara says Omar Rav Yehuda Haman the Shokel Akufi Miglime. Somebody takes threads from a garment, Chayiv Mishum BePatish V'Hanimini to copy it alayu. So you're Chayiv Makkeh BePatish as long as you are makbid, as long as you are copied on so doing. So I saw in the Rishonim what I think is two mahalchim in how to learn pshat in the Gemara. Rashi says the Shokal Kufi. From what I could understand, maybe Rabbi Isa, you can help me. I'm not sure I understood Rashi properly, but from what I understood, when you weave a garment, so you have the threads woven in this sort of crisscross pattern, and then at the ends you have the ends of the threads. So you have a problem. How do you stop the ends of the threads untangling? So there's two solutions to the problem. The modern day solution is you fold a hem back and sew it, and that stops the threads untangling. The old-fashioned solution is a bit like we have on a talis, which is you have the threads coming out and you have tied knots at the end of the. I don't mean the strings, the tzitzit strings of the talis. I mean the little sort of bubbly things that come out of the wool. So that's all the loose ends of the threads, which you then knot, and that way you stop it unraveling. So basically, when you weave, you interweave the threads, but you want it not to, and that produces a cloth. The bulk of the cloth is held together by the tautness, by the tension of the threads, because it's woven in and out. But the end strings aren't held taut because they're the end strings, and they will slowly unravel, and gradually the whole cloth will unravel over time. So you have to somehow stop it unraveling. And the way they used to do this was by knotting the ends. And I think what Rashi is saying is that after you knot them, there's still further threads hanging out, and they need to be sliced off, because you want at the ends of your beged to have clean knots, and you don't want hanging threads beyond those knots, and that's what you're cutting off. I'm going here with the Gersa in Rashi. In my print, I'm lucky enough to have a modern print in which it slightly changes the Gersa of Rashi. I think quoting from it's quoted from one of the manuscripts. The reading of Rashi is Rashi Chutin Hatuluyim B'Yuriya, the heads of the threads that are hanging off the cloth. B'mokum Kishuron, that's how the Gersa is, at the point of the knots. Kishnitik Ba Chut V'Kashur, where a thread became unattached and he knotted it. So either Rashi means the knots that are built into the structure, or he means, and you deliberately cut off the thread at that point because you wanted to end your garment, or you mean to accidentally the strings got detached and you knotted them, which is similar to Nofel Bardana in the beginning in the previous Amud, and you knotted it, and then again you want to slice off the ends of the threads, so all you have is the knot and you don't have extra dangling threads. Is that how everyone learned the first pshat in? Is that how everyone learned the first pshat in Rashi?
It's a bit difficult to say that's how Rashi, when you look at the V'chein, because on the V'chein it looks like that the strings might be interwoven but detached, not that there's a detaching.
Sorry, what's your point? I'm not understanding the point.
So on the second half of Rashi, the v'chein.
Yes.
So it looks like the things which are caught up in the
Little bits of dirt and things that get caught up in the weaving process.
Yes, caught up in the weaving process. So after thinking that these strings were attached, we thought that maybe if Rashi's comparing it to the second case, so maybe these strings were loose strings which were interwoven but not actually attached.
Right. I see. You're saying Hatsuya means they're sort of little strands of thread that got caught up in the weaving.
Yes.
Maybe. Okay. Okay, thank you. Maybe. I wasn't quite sure what to make of Rashi. Okay, possibly you may well be right. There may be a better reason than what I'm saying. And did anyone else get it? How did anyone else learn Rashi?
We were just myself and our new participant Henry Keller, who's joined us, one of my other neighbours in the base of BePatish. So we were thinking that, I mean, the first reading we thought was actually, it was almost in parentheses. It was sort of, if they were tied to they were tied together, and these things sort of became loose after they were tied. The other reading was actually, there was an activity. The Gemara Malacha was actually Kishuran, you tied them as part of the thing, which was an interesting reading. It didn't fit in so well with V'chein, but you had two different Gemara Malachas. The Gemara Malacha could be tying them together after they were loose, and in the second activity, it's just removal. But he's giving two different examples, so we were struggling.
No, I don't think it means the knotting because of the language of the Gemara. The shokolakuf, you take the threads. So I assumed even in the first reading of Rashi, it's starting to talk about removal of the threads. I was just struggling to understand how these threads got here. Jeffrey, maybe
you removed them and then maybe you removed them and then you tied them as well as part of the process. I don't know, but probably not.
Why? I don't know why you would tie removed threads rather than removing them. I don't know. Okay, so either way, Rashi, whatever exactly we're talking here about removal of threads, and then Rashi in the second malach, I think is easier, or not second malach, is comparison. V'chein is you're removing little bits of straw or other bits of dirt that got woven in by accident, and you remove them. Okay, so either way, that's how Rashi learns tomorrow, that you're removing these things by accident that somehow got interwoven into it.
How's the Rav reading Rashi?
Sorry, Asha?
Can you repeat how you're reading Rashi?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure how I'm reading Rashi. I'll attempt to repeat it. So Rashi Chutin Hatsulayim B'Yuriya. I'll tell you. I mean, there's two ways of reading the ends of threads which are hanging the cloth. The Makkeh Kishur. I'm going with the gears of the Makkeh Kishur in the place of knots. Where a thread was detached and he knotted it. So you're knotting threads. Why are you knotting threads? Either because it's at the end of the weaving process, you have threads which are left hanging. Always by definition, as you interweave, you have the ends of the cloth. You have these threads and you don't want them to slowly unravel, and therefore you knot them. Or in the weaving process, a thread broke and you knotted it. And when you knot threads, you always get a little bit of hanging over, and therefore you're removing those hanging over threads. That's one way I understood it. Or Jeffrey is suggesting that when you cut a thread and knot it, there's hanging bits of thread that you remove, but then they get trapped in the cloth as you weave it, a bit like the straw gets trapped in the cloth as you weave it, as Rashi says in his second shot, and you're unpicking these little bits of trapped thread.
Okay, thank you.
Why? Sorry, the second case, the V'chein Kashin.
Yes.
Why is that not Bora?
I think because they're not mixed up, they're visible. So there's no mixture. A mixture has to be one of two things. A mixture has to be where it's somehow functioning together, which is either because these are very small things which are mixed in, or because there's something else that joins it together, like a salad which is eaten together. If its functionality is separate, I don't know if that would be bora.
So picking out things which are interwoven. I mean, we understood that the first case, if we were right about the threads, so then that was min b'mino, so that was okay. But the second, you're taking out kushin aksonim from thread. Why is that not a mixture?
If the exact definition of a mixture, has to be something that's creating a commonality. If you have on your plate potatoes, meat, and rice, and you choose to take a piece of potato or a piece of meat, that's not bora, because it's large enough and separate enough that it's not bora. So over here, I'm assuming these kasomim or kashin are large enough that they're graspable and visible at a glance, and with one seizable with one act, and therefore this wouldn't be bora. That's what I'm understanding it as. But again, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm just saying the maths of what would make it not bora. How big these little bits of straw are, I don't know.
Okay. Thank
you. That's a half answer. Yeah, but that's what would make it not bora in answer to your question, in technical answer to your question. Okay, so either way, this is how Rashi seems to learn the Gemara. Then the Gemara says that this is only where you're makpid, but if you're not makpid, then you're potter. For honey minute to copy to you, that's where you're makpid. Where you're not makpid, not. It doesn't say whether you're potter or mutter. So what's the pshat in not makpid? So the Rosh says, Akufi, he says, "Hey, now kashorim akismin dakin aboltim in abaged." I don't know exactly what that means. V'hani midi to copy to you. That's where you're makbid on them, because you don't want to wear it till you remove them. In other words, the Rosh is learning pshat in the Gemara, hani midi to copy it, where you're makbid on these threads. Because if you're not makbid on the threads, then it wouldn't be Makkeh BePatish. Makkeh BePatish is finishing off a utensil. If the talis is already finished, and you don't care about these little hanging threads or straws, then that's not Makkeh BePatish, because you're doing nothing. You're not makbid on it at all. So says the Rosh. The Rambam, it's part of. I only printed part of the Rambam. I cut and pasted it because it's embedded within a rather complex Rambam. The Rambam translates the Gemara as this is the Rambam Peg Yot Halach Yud Ches. Again, I print it. Halakei Chaveles Yuvoles Shal Gabi Begodim Biyodo. So some sort of like a wart or something. I guess it means some twists of threads. Could go in Eida Yuvoles Bechitzema. Like you get little clusters of threads on a wool garment. Then he says, that's where you're yakved. He's quoting the Gemara. If you remove them, derech esek, then you are potter. So the Rambam seems to be saying that translation of makbid is how you're doing it, as opposed to whether you are makbid on wearing the garment, because it seems to say that if you remove them without, if you remove them with kamis asik, in other words, without intention to improve the garment, then you are potter. But if you remove them with intention deliberately, then you're chayev. And he doesn't therefore say that you're makbid not to wear the garment. So in brief, the Rosh says it's only Makkeh BePatish if you are makbid not to wear the garment with these threads. If you don't care enough about the threads, that you don't care, even though it's beautifying the garment, that's not Makkeh BePatish, because you don't care enough about the threads to make it Makkeh BePatish. The Rambam seems to say that you're chayev as long as you remove them intentionally, and you're only potter if low copied, meaning you're doing kamisase. You're not consciously sort of carefully thinking about what you're doing. You're just putting them in a distracted way, thinking of something else. In other words, he doesn't seem to say this condition that you would be makpid not to wear the garment without it. So I don't know what to make of the Rambam. Again, one or two explanations in the Rambam. Either we have here a very significant machlokas between the Rambam and the other Rishonim about if you are beautifying the garment, whether that's Makkeh BePatish or not. And the other Rishonim say this is only a melacha Makkeh BePatish if you wouldn't use it without it. And the Rambam says even if you're beautifying it, that would be sufficient. That's one possibility in the Rambam. Or alternatively, maybe the Rambam says, even if you're not makpid, since the garment is incomplete, therefore, fundamentally, you're doing Makkeh BePatish, irrespective of your subjective hakbada. Objectively, Makkeh BePatish is occurring. So what would happen if I am doing something which is an objective Makkeh BePatish, but I'm not particularly interested in the result because I personally don't care? The answer would be, this would be a melacha shein tzricha l'gufa. I'm doing a melacha without caring enough about the designated end result of the melacha. In which case, this would be the Rambam, the Shittosai, that melacha shein tzricha l'gufa is chayev. So again, I just point this out for your edification. Make of this what you want. The Rosh says that makbid means only if you wouldn't wear the garment, because if you would wear it, then by definition that's not Makkeh BePatish. And the Rambam says even if you wouldn't wear the garment, you're chayev. That's what he seems to say. And the low copy of the Gemara is referring to, as opposed to someone who's just doing it Masechet. Very interesting and schwer, difficult reading in the Gemara, because this is always a rule. If you're Masechet, you're not chayev. That's a general principle. Why does he point out these are copied? This is where you're makpid on doing it. Maybe because they're picking at threads in your wool garments is something people do in a distracted manner. And now, if he wanted to point out, if you do it in a distracted manner, you're not chayev. But it's a general principle of Yehuda Masechet. I mean, that Masechet. It's funny that here it's called copied. We should say a general rule. I mean, it's a rule in all melachos. If you're Masechet, you're not chayev. Nonetheless, this is how the Rambam reads the Gemara. That the reason for the exemption here is because Masechet. In which case, the Rambam seems to say, I don't care about the Rosh's condition that I'm makpid not to wear the garment, either because he holds as Makkeh BePatish even if I'm beautifying the garment, or because he holds, since objectively the garment isn't really finished until this is done. Therefore, even though subjectively I don't care, that merely makes it melacha shein tzricha l'gufa, and melacha shein tzricha l'gufa is chayev. That was the final sort of point I wanted to draw your attention to in the Gemara.
How can the Rosh sort of make it a subjective thing? Because the person making the garment is not necessarily the person wearing it. So the person making the garment might, not be bothered or be bothered, but it surely makes more sense to say it's an objective thing.
I don't know. I mean, it could be the Rosh is learning that actually the objective is the other way around. Objectively speaking, craftsmen don't normally need to do this, and therefore it's not Makkeh BePatish unless you're copied. If you're personally makpid, that gives it, and the chiddush is the other way around. It gives it the chashivas of Makkeh BePatish because of my subjective hakbada, even though objectively it's not Makkeh BePatish because because normally craftsmen don't feel they need to finish off the garment that well. So I mean, your point is good. Is this the wearer who's doing it, or is this the shopkeeper who's doing it? Maybe it's saying that normally this wouldn't be Makkeh BePatish, the craftsman, because most people aren't makpid, and therefore it needs your hakbada to be machshavit as Makkeh BePatish. You're extra, the degree to which you're extra pedantic about it, and don't like wearing garments that have these hanging threads, that makes it into Makkeh BePatish.
Thank you.
Okay, Rabbi, so we'll stop here, and then Hashem start the next sugya on Sunday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not trying to explain the Rambam, the Torah, the Shepherd.